This chapter is called God, the Failed Hypothesis, and he wants to now finish up this issue of science and see where we have where it gets us with regard to postulating whether or not God exists.
Right.
Really is what he's getting at.
I think Mitch Stokes is pretty fair in this book, too, because every time he makes a really good point, he goes, well, let's put that aside and let's grant the other person this. So he's granted a lot, and he's going to continue to do so.
So we'll see a lot of granting in this chapter. Right? Okay, this is the problem, this is the problem, but let's just say it's not. Now where does it get us? Yeah, so he says here, let's suppose that everything that science says about the physical part of the reality, even the part we can't observe, is entirely true, although he's just spent a lot of time talking to us about why we should be skeptical about that stuff, right? So he says, would this show then that there is no God, or that even if there is, he isn't responsible for the cosmos' existence and behavior? And he answers, not obviously, right? And so now what he wants to do here is to walk us through again briefly M theory. You'll recall that was one of the quantum or theories about the nature of the universe. Mm-hmm. And he says there that Hawkins argued that contemporary physics in the form of M theory makes God superfluous, at least in that God isn't needed to explain the universe's existence and its astonishing complexity and order. And so, mathematics, he says, is what they say tell us that's what M theory is all about. Tells us we are assured that the universe can be created spontaneously out of nothing by quantum fluctuations. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's where it comes from. All right, so that's kind of where he starts here, and that's Hawking's claim and issue. Right. And so he points out several problems with that, right?
So here, Hawking's in trying to nail down existence, let's see, why things exist, why they are the way they are, and why the rules are the way they are. Instead of taking that one dart and trying to hit the bullseye, he just uses 500 darts and says good enough, and that explains it. So eventually, with 500 darts, you're going to hit the bullseye.
Somewhere you
get us. So there you go.
That's right. Even though the bullseye might be there and you're aiming over there, eventually you'll hit it somehow.
And no one believes in 499 other ones that can be tested. It's just assumed.
So he says, unfortunately, things aren't quite as easy as Hawkins has suggested. One problem stems from his instrumentalism. Right. As you'll recall, the instrumentalist says something to the effect that, we're not interested in whether or not theories are true. We just want to make sure that they work, right? That they allow for prediction and that sort of thing.
Right.
So he says one problem is Hawking's instrumentalism, or it's also called non-realism, right? So if he's an instrumentalist, why should we take his arguments seriously? He himself says that we shouldn't believe what science says about unobservables. Yeah. That's the idea of instrumentalism, right? It says, for instance, we don't know whether or not quarks exist. We can't observe them, but we can postulate, perhaps or maybe, as long as they allow us to make predictions and that sort of thing.
Does it work? Yeah, sure. For now, it does.
So if we're to take his scientific authority seriously, shouldn't we take his instrumentalism seriously as well? And so. So that's the first issue. All right, you're an instrumentalist, so how can you speak to whether or not the fact of a particular, whether or not God exists? You're not even sure if non-observables exist, right? So, give me a break here, is really what's going on, right? But he says, and here he goes, right? He's going to put that to the side. He says, but let's ignore that problem and suppose that Hawkins is wrong about instrumentalism and that M theory isn't merely a useful tool, that's what instrumentalist says, for predicting and describing phenomena, right? So would there be anything about M theory then, even with these concessions, that is inconsistent with God's existence or with his ultimate role in the universe's creation? And he says, well, it's hard to see that there would.
Right.
He says, after all, it seems possible that these quantum fluctuations are simply perhaps God's means of creating all these universes ex nihilo, intending that one of them produce humanity.
Right, which we see someone like William Lane Craig use this exact same argument for his own purposes, and clearly he's not discounting God in it. In fact, he's using it to bolster up his claim and his view of who God is and stuff like that. And there are definite problems with utilizing that, but he at least we can agree that William Lane Craig is not an idiot who's arguing against his own position, in what he considers kind of the best argumentation, especially in light of M theory. He's trying to utilize it, and so here's someone who's using Hawking's own theory kind of against him. So it doesn't follow that God is superfluous or that he doesn't exist, and he goes on to explain about maybe utilizing that kind of evolutionary approach of we'll eventually get it is how God operates. And Craig even puts God even above those multi-universes and said that in pretty much every single universe God is above it. So
right.
Yeah.
So even though we might hold to it and it might be we might be on the right track there, that doesn't mean that God didn't use that for his own purposes, right? Furthermore, he says, consider all the universes that M theory posits, each one with different physical laws. The vast number of these different legal systems is further legislated by the more fundamental meta laws of M theory, right? But then he asks, these meta laws? Where did they come from?
Right. I thought this was interesting too, because at some basic factor, Hawkins was saying, here's universals. Like he says, they're meta laws. Yeah. So why, if you can believe in meta laws, why can't you just believe in a single state of universal laws? In this universe, what you don't. The only reason that you need to have meta laws first is that you can't kind of postulate things that are, well, what does the law of non-contradiction look like in universe 357? Well, there sometimes the car is in the garage and sometimes it's not, but it depends if it's Tuesday or not. Then it can be in both places. But the only reason that he's really using this is so he can get away from the fact that the sheer the possibility, the preconditions needed for the universe to bang, to come into existence, to have the universal laws possible,
to operate the way it does.
Then to get to us, rains on the rocks for millions of years. Yeah. Life evolves through a very minute possibility that even they admit. So even if you take for granted all other pieces of his idea of how the universe came to about, he seems to be wanting kind of his cake and eating it too. Yeah. Yep, there are meta universal laws when we talk about 500 universes, but not this one. So.
Yeah, so the issue is, where the laws come from, right? And of course you can't rule out God.
Yeah.
Right? He gives us no reason to think that God himself isn't the cause of the laws in the universe.
Right. If you have the bag of marbles and each marble is a universe, who's holding the bag in that one?
Yeah. So here's the issue, right? Can you have laws without a lawmaker, right? And he's suggesting that Hawkings and his theory doesn't give us any reason to not believe that there is a lawmaker,
right,
that has made the laws,
right,
opposing
right. You can go farther and say that Hawkins almost accidentally argues for the existence of God. In fact, Romans 1 tells us that everyone believes that, so they operate kind of in their worldview with those kind of preconceptions, and they borrow from the Christian worldview to operate. But here, Stokes is just saying that he doesn't make his case. If you're trying to say God is guilty of not existing, he's failed in his attempt.
Right. Number one, just because there are M theory posits all of these quantum fluctuations. Number one. And he puts this aside. Instrumentalism doesn't allow you to it's a non-realist position. So you can't. It doesn't say whether or not these various non-observables exist. God clearly exist at all. Mm-hmm. Clearly, God is non-observable, so it can't even comment on that, right? And secondly, it's hard to see that these quantum fluctuations, why and how, and the universes that they produce. why not we say that God is the is the source of those? Well, there's no way to say that either, right?
Right.
That they didn't come from God, right? And so there's no reason to believe that God himself isn't the cause, then, thirdly, of the laws of the various universes, because, if you have a law, you would expect the lawmaker type of thing, right? And so, yes, you're right. He's claiming here that Hawkins really doesn't make his case that God doesn't exist, right?